Part 3 of the Blast Cabinet series coming up next. Welcome back to the shop. Before we continue with the build, I'd like to go back and cover a few points from part 2. I'd like to first start by saying thank you for your feedback. Your questions and comments are always welcome. In part 2, we installed the Baffle Box and the box topper. I mentioned I was going to remove it and paint it, which I did, but I also wanted to mention these parts really don't need to be painted. Tacoma Company uses Galvalume. Galvalume is an aluminum zinc alloy coating. He uses a 20 gauge, approximately 35 thousandths thick sheet metal to make these parts. It's corrosion and rust resistant. And as a matter of fact, paint's not going to last very long on the inside of a blast cabinet. And it's really going to go quick depending on which blast media you're using. It won't be pretty for long. Another more durable option to painting is powder coating. It will add additional cost to your cabinet and it will erode. How fast? Again, really depends on which blast media you're using. Also, the box topper. I wanted to talk a little bit more detail about that. The box topper closes off the top of that box on the back panel and it's flat. I mentioned that's not the only option. You could angle it and fold the ears over and seal it up. One important thing I forgot to mention was the reason the top of that box is flat is to keep the media from building up inside of that angle. So when you fold over the edge, it creates that sharp corner on the inside and media can build up in there, then fall down and end up in your vacuum. So the idea of having the top flat, the heavier media is going to come up and bounce off that flat spot and then back down the chute into your hopper or box. I had a couple questions about the fasteners and why I put the nuts on the inside of the box when I said in part 1 that we were going to put our hardware in backwards. Well, let me clarify that. In the areas where you have a vertical situation where you're straight up and down, the nuts on the inside are okay. That's why I talked about pointing the points of the shoulder. I'll bring you in closer on the hardware again, but the points on the square nuts up. That way media can't collect on the tops of them. And we're in a vertical state, so it's not really gonna cause like a shelf. Now, if you were in a slope area and you had a nut sitting there, that's more of an area where it could collect. And that's where you want the flatness of the heads of your hardware. So when we get to the hopper assembly, they will be installed backwards. Let me bring you in close on the hardware once again and talk a little bit about that. I mentioned this before. The Harbor Freight hardware kit will work just fine for assembling your cabinet, but there are added benefits to the Tacoma Company's rivet screws. These screws have about a 300 thousandths wide head, about 40 thousandths thick. They have a 1/4 thread and they're stainless steel. The nuts are regular steel, and the reason we're using these nuts is because it's the only nut that Mike Tacoma can find that has a truly completely flat bottom. Here's the top of the nut. It has that little flat area there, but the bottom has a completely flat spot. Also in part 2, we converted the Harbor Freight fresh air intake located on the rear panel of the blast cabinet into the vacuum port by installing and sealing the wastegate elbow. This part serves 2 purposes. 1, for plugging your vacuum into, and 2, for adjusting the cabinet negative pressure. In a future video, and once the blast cabinet is all assembled, up and running, I'll talk more into detail about negative cabinet pressure and vacuum strength and how that really affects the performance of your blast cabinet. Once I got the cabinet back up on the workbench, flipped upside down and safely secure, I took the liberty of loosely installing the legs in the shelf. Now they're loose for a reason, and I'm going to explain why. There's something I need to remind you of before we go any further, and that's these shims. The Harbor Freight hardware package comes with 3 of these shims. They're for the legs, and the reason there's 3 is the door hinge takes up the gap of one of these. So don't forget to install them per the instructions. The Harbor Freight hardware kit will work just fine for installing the legs and the shelf. I had a box of these button socket caps, 1/4 by 3/8, so I used them for a little cleaner look. So let's talk about installing these legs. The reason everything is loose is so I could get the shelf in here. Now the whole idea behind it is to tighten the shelf up. That way it will square the legs up. If you were to tighten the legs first, then install the shelf, it won't line up. Believe me. And don't ask me how I know that. So drop the shelf in, tighten it up, then tighten your legs. Then take the hardware out and remove the shelf because we need access to install the hopper, which is coming up next. We now have the hopper loosely assembled on top of the workbench. I got 8 rivet screws in it. So we're gonna finish assembling it using the Tacoma Company rivet screws with the nuts on the outside and the heads on the inside. I'm gonna go back to part 1 to remind you that we need to remove the foam tape from these 2 panels. Remove the foam tape with a heat gun or torch to help heat it up and get it peeled off, and then clean all the goobers off. We're going to assemble this hopper dry for now, so no RTV in these seams. After I get all the rivet screws in and the nuts snugged up, we're going to install another Tacoma Company upgrade. Again, we're just going to push on the head of the rivet screw, tighten the nut up. And then just for aesthetics, I'm going to line all the nuts up in a diamond pattern, just like we did on the inside of the box. Now that we have the hopper assembled, dry, with no sealant, we have our fasteners all snugged up. The next step in the assembly of the hopper is to install what Harbor Freight calls their funnel mouth, and this is called the removal cover. What this does is retain the media and allow you to dump the blast media when you need to change it out. Now this works fine if you're using Harbor Freight's gun and Harbor Freight's pickup tube. The way the factory blast cabinet works is this pickup tube picks media up on the inside of the hopper and brings it to the gun. For our build, we're going to be using a metering valve. That metering valve attaches to the bottom of this removal cover. So what you would do is you would drill an 1.25 inch hole in the bottom of this cover and attach the metering valve, which I don't have yet. I just want to explain this process to you, because we're going to install a Tacoma Company upgrade in place of this funnel mouth. So you could still use this with the metering valve. You just have to drill a hole in the cover and seal it up, of course. The Tacoma Company upgrade we're going to install replaces this funnel mouth with a hopper adapter. This hopper adapter already has the threaded stub for the metering valve. So this is going to go here in place of that funnel mouth. Now let me talk about the hardware. We're going to use the same hardware, except the nuts are going to be on the inside. Now you're probably saying, Ray, you just installed them with the heads on the inside and nuts on the outside. Remember earlier when I mentioned in a vertical position, it's okay to use the nuts? That's exactly what we're doing here. This flange goes from a slope here to vertical. So it's okay to use the nuts on the inside. We're going to install this dry as well, and then we're going to add the caulk to the outside later. So let's go ahead and get this installed. I'm going to snug the fasteners with all the points of the nuts facing up. Here's a shot of the hopper adapter with the rivet screws, heads on the outside, and then on the hopper itself, we got the nuts on the outside, and I have them in a diamond pattern all the way down on all sides. Next step, we're gonna measure and get the exact center, top, bottom, and sides, and then we're gonna go over there to the box and do the same thing. This is going to allow us, when we raise the hopper up to the box, so we could get it perfectly centered. This is 33.25, so half of that is 16 5/8. We're going to go ahead and put a little mark. Now I'm going to carry that mark down into the hopper a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and mark these out. Then we're going to go over to the box and mark it out. Now that the rivet screws and nuts are all snugged up, we're going to get ready to do the caulking First area we're gonna caulk is gonna be this seam right here. I'm gonna get some painter's tape and I'm gonna tape a seam, top and bottom. That way I could just take my finger and just rub it right into those edges. The whole idea here, we want to just seal on the outside, of course, the hopper adapter to the hopper. That tiny little pencil line right there, we just want to fill that. So I'm going to tape this all up and then bring it back. We're only going to open up a very small hole here, so that way too much caulk doesn't come out. We can always go bigger, but I'm going to start out small and see how it goes. And of course I'm going to glove up. Loctite recommends waiting 20 minutes before removing the painter's tape. So we're going to move to the hopper and we'll get that caulked up. I left like a little bit over a 1/4 inch gap between the tape lines. And as you can see, I just covered up the rivet screws. So I'm on the inside shoulder of those rivet screws. We're going to get it all down in the seams, down where the hopper meets the hopper adapter. About 25 minutes has elapsed, so I'm going to attempt to take off the painter's tape without disturbing our nice, perfect seal. Loctite recommends 1 full week of cure time before painting. In the Harbor Freight instructions, this frame-shaped ring is called the bottom plate. They show it going on the top side of the hopper, in between the top of the hopper and the bottom of the box. We're going to repurpose this and use it as a reinforcing ring on the bottom side of the hopper, and we're going to use the polyurethane to glue it on. I found that you have plenty of working time with this polyurethane, so you don't need to get in a hurry. I'm going to put a few of these spring clamps around it just to help it hold it in place. I have spring clamps all around it so it can sit overnight now and harden up a little bit. I'm going to get in here with a flashlight, turn the lights off in the shop, and see if I have any gaps or light escaping from inside the box. So if there's any gaps with the baffle box or the box topper, this is the time to find the leak, find the light, and get it sealed up before we marry the hopper to the box. Everything else is good. When I was tightening up the rivet screw, it shattered the powder coat on the inside of the hopper. I talked to Mike about this, and he said he's seen it, but very rarely has he seen it. And it's caused by poor powder coating and very poor prep before powder coating. I was going to just paint the seams, and the reason we're painting the caulk is not for aesthetics. We're painting it for a smooth surface so the blast media can slide down the corners. What I'm going to do, I hate to do it, but I'm going to end up bringing the paint all the way up over the stainless steel rivet screws and painting that to fill in where the powder coat chipped off. That way we have a nice smooth finish. I could remove the rivet screws and clean the heads back off and put them back, but I don't want to risk chipping more powder coat. At this point, they're snug, they're good, so I'm just going to paint over them and live with it. Here's the worst one. This one really chunked out. The final thing before we marry the hopper to the box, we're going to install this 1 inch wide by 1/8 inch thick high density foam, and this was provided by the Tacoma Company. This did not come with the Harbor Freight kit. The foam tape that came with the Harbor Freight blast cabinet is about 3/4 inches wide, about 1/8 inch thick, and it's super light. It's almost as light as air. The Tacoma Company foam tape is a much better quality tape. You could feel the density difference is significant compared to the Harbor Freight stuff. I'm cleaning with a little bit of alcohol so I get good adhesion with the foam tape. Make sure we still have our alignment marks on the inside of the hopper because our tape's going to cover up the lines we drew. In the Harbor Freight instructions, they want you to use these M6 by 25 millimeter. So I'm going to try to get away with using shorter ones. I'm going to poke through the foam. I'm going to install them from the outside up, and I want to explain more about that when we actually marry the hopper to the box. I have a piece of 3/4 inch plywood with an 1 3/8 hole drilled in it just to protect the threads of the hopper adapter. I have it sitting on the jack, and I'm gonna just slowly raise it up and try to line up the screws in the holes. The foam is holding all the screws in right now, so hopefully I can get them lined up, get a couple nuts started, and then get it all centered up. I'm working on getting the hopper perfectly aligned with the box. The back is lined up perfect. The front is off a little bit. The box must not be square. So I'm gonna tighten up the back ones where this is lined up, and then I'm gonna pull the front of the hopper over and line that up. My one side over there looks perfect. I can see it from here. And this one's off just a tiny bit. So I'm gonna be moving this around, tightening as I go, and get it completely centered. The hopper is all lined up on our marks. All the hardware is snug. The only thing left to do, as far as the hopper goes, is paint the seams. And I have to wait a week for that. And I didn't want to wait a week to install the hopper, so we can paint that in there. I would like to talk about one more thing before we conclude part 3, because this is running a little long. I'm gonna be using the cuff kit, which basically smooths out the area and transition from the box to the hopper. If you're not going to use the cuff kit and you're going to use the Harbor Freight hardware, if you're just using the hardware, I would put the heads on the inside of the box. So you could use either the 24 millimeter or the 12 millimeter, which I used and they worked. So if you have them left over, if not, these are the ones that you're supposed to be using and they work just fine too, except that you're gonna see a whole bunch sticking out. You see how much is sticking out here? Only about a 1/16. So they worked out pretty good. This will conclude part 3. In part 4, we have a whole bunch more of Tacoma upgrades and some more tips. So until then, see ya.